Hi, guys. This is an introduction to healing, and this particular session is on an introduction to mindfulness. So, this particular topic is near and dear to my heart, and I want to share with you guys kind of a background of my experience and kind of process of being with this concept of mindfulness, my experience and the conceptualization of it. You've already seen the introduction to Vipassana. I had already been through kind of a formal meditation and was meditating in my life. I was a massage therapist, a neuromuscular advanced massage therapist. I had a practice, and my meditation was shifting me. It was creating me a certain presence, and it it began that presence begins to teach people things, and I began to have answers for people that were on my massage table, and I didn't know whether or not I was supposed to have answers for people that were on my massage table. I'm like, aren't you supposed to have a degree, for something like this? And so it motivated me to make a decision to go back to school in my late 30s. And I went back to school for a degree in psychology, and it was during my bachelor's that I ended up taking a course, and this is an individual, Dr. Eric Stocks, was a research professor, and he's now a really good friend of mine. We do music together. Uh, he was my first research professor, and he basically said, pick a topic, and here's PubMed, and here's PsycInfo, and write a paper on something. And so I had already known, like, the reason why I went back to school was I knew that I wanted to merge meditation and psychology. I just didn't know how or why. And so this is what I was interested in studying. I was incredibly interested in meditation. So I started reading, and I started reading all of the studies and all of the published peer review type of articles where all of the kind of the established science was, as opposed to a lot of the things that I'd heard up to that point, as far as talking about karma and chakras and things like that, that I had, like, what is even meditation? I didn't even know. I found this word called mindfulness, and in the data that I was perusing, I kept coming across kind of a gold standard that was being mentioned, and it was being compared to in so many different ways. And it was a program that was called mindfulness based stress reduction. And in that reading, just some simple kind of search engine activity, I was able to find that there was a Center for Mindfulness up in Boston, Massachusetts, and they were doing trainings. And so I got myself up to Boston just as quick as I could. And, it was a weird time back then, because when I was going through school, I remember taking the history of psychology, and Dr. Gill, who was teaching that, and the 13th chapter, I think it's funny there's 13, unlucky, supposed to be a lucky number, which is a lucky number for me. The 13th chapter was on mindfulness. And I think Dr. Gill said, well, mindfulness comes from the Buddhist, and they believe all life is suffering, and there's not going to be any questions on the exam for that. I'm like, oh my God, what are you, like, you're missing so much. And it was during that time that I even created, after I came back from training, my first aspect of mindfulness-based stress reduction, that I created a club at the university called the Mindfulness Society that became a meetup group that kind of continued for a while. We actually still have. And it was unusual, like me knowing about mindfulness or wanting to know about mindfulness. It wasn't part of the normal curriculum. Like, it wasn't in mainstream yet. I've heard that they've made a lot of changes, and now when I went to that MBSR, one of my good friends that I talk to every year or so is has a PhD in mindfulness. I didn't even know that you can merge those two things together. So phenomenal. So I went up there, and I went through what was a very intensive MBSR, a 5-day MBSR, that then had a 4-day practicum that taught you about everything that you just learned, and it taught you about how to then turn that into an 8-week course that was known as the MBSR. And so when I came back, I was allowed to teach a course based off of MBSR. I wasn't allowed to teach MBSR. I had to then go through over a period of years. And so when you look at this training process for MBSR, it's not unlike learning how to turn on a bunch of different heaters in order to melt a really, really big, block of ice. Like, there was a process to it, right? So I ended up having to do another intensive in California. And then I had to do a supervision, which I did with, a mindfulness instructor and author, Bob Stahl. He was an amazing supervisor as well. And there were other things that were required in the process of that in order for me to be able to, once I finished that intensive, I could then teach MBSR as the term MBSR. And there's other trainings you can do. I also had the distinct privilege of being able to go to Switzerland and to be in one of the very final trainings that Jon Kabat-Zinn, the creator and original creator of MBSR, and Sakya Santarelli, who was for many years the director of the Center for Mindfulness, were teaching together on the science of mindfulness in education, and I forget the exact name, but it was a requirement in order to continue on for kind of the certification in teaching MBSR. So this word mindfulness, number one, MBSR, mindfulness-based stress reduction. This was a program that when we talk about Vipassana, there's kind of another branch of that was taught that's called insight meditation. That wasn't really Goenka. It was it was this other branch, and Jon Kabat-Zinn was a scientist. He was a molecular biologist with a PhD from MIT, and he was at Massachusetts Medical, and he had been going to like the local Y or whatever, and they had classes on meditation, and they had classes on yoga, and he noticed that people that were going to the yoga classes weren't staying for the meditation classes, and vice versa. And so he had gone to a lot of different retreats, and it was while he was at one of these particular retreats that he had kind of this insight of, a lot of this is based off of, kind of an Eastern Buddhist, dare we say religious kind of aspect. He says, what if we could strip all that out? There's a mechanism that's actually here. There's many mechanisms that are here, in that we can do something with our consciousness and it can create a desired effect. And so what John did was he first went to the chronic pain doctors. I was one of the first people that he talked to. And they said, how many people are you guys, helping? And they were like, maybe 20%. And then there's a certain number of people that spontaneously get better with their chronic pain. But then the majority of these other people were just kind of trying to help maintain. And this is why since that time, we had this huge opiate, type of epidemic as well. So John was like, okay, the chronic pain patients, send those people to me. And so that's how it began. The 90% of the original attendees were people that had chronic pain. And John was a scientist, like his father before him. And so he immediately started tracking results. And one of the things he was able to prove was there was a significant reduction in the experience of pain. Not in pain itself, but the experience of pain in people that had chronic pain. And they kind of trudged along, and they had a room like in the basement of the hospital there, and there's a lot of funny stories that came with that. And then there was a show that came out, Country Reporter, that Bill, I forget the guy's last name, ended up doing a show on this particular program, and it kind of blew up the program, and the phone started ringing, and it really never stopped after that. So after John had that program going, it's evolved into a lot of different things. And there's a lot of things about that program that I always had a lot of respect for. One of the things that I was aware that they did as instructors was they got together every Monday and they discussed how the week went, and they threw things out on the table where they opened up their hearts and the mind and their own minds, going, how could I have maybe been a better instructor? With this, how could I have been a better teacher? How could I have handled this particular situation in a different way? And it's an ongoing aspect to where they're, analyzing this as well. So that's kind of the history of the MBSR program. Since then, the amount of Fortune 500 companies that we've had that have incorporated some sort of mindfulness program. We see it with insurance companies, we see it with Google, with Aetna, with the U.S. Army, Microsoft. There's a lot of companies now across the world that offer a mindfulness training program for very clear reasons, that if you can decrease stress, it will affect your bottom line. And so that makes it a very valuable thing for us to study. because when we are able to come out of the story of suffering and be more in the present, it means if you're really truly in the present, it means that you can handle just about anything. So what is this thing that's called mindfulness? Well, John, I'm going to paraphrase, I may get it a little bit wrong, but John would define mindfulness as paying attention on purpose without judgment. And we would add with loving kindness and compassion for yourself. And so, we ask, what does this paying attention mean? And so we can go through a lot of the different types of meditation that were introduced in the program, which included, lying down yoga and standing yoga, which are basically just in the way they were presented, a form of mindfulness in movement where we're still very present in what's going on inside of our body, while we're doing that. And the very first meditation that the MBSR program would introduce people to would be something that was known as a raisin meditation. And we don't. This is on a video, so I don't know if you want to pause this and go find your raisin. You can do it. I'm going to walk through this very, very quickly, but I want you to kind of get a taste of what the raisin meditation did for people when it came to describing and understanding mindfulness. What we would traditionally do is we would hand out raisins and ask them to pick one that they kind of resonated with, I guess. And then I would ask people to kind of just call out and begin giving descriptions of what they saw. And so we would be looking at, color. People would say, well, it looks brown, or it looks purple, or it looks, whatever color that they, were resonating with that being. And other descriptions like, well, it's wrinkly, or it's, it's got pits, or it's, it's shiny. And, we would move through different senses with this, going, okay, well, let's hold it up to, to the nose and let's smell it. What does it smell like? And, people would say, well, it smells sweet, it smells raisiny. Earthy was a really good one. I always liked that one as well. There was sometimes something that would be different as well. And then what is a raisin? Like it's a what? It's a dried out grape, right? And so like hold it up to your ears and squish it. And like, is it dried out? No, there's still oils and things in there. You can hear it. So it's not completely dried out also. And to take that raisin, just rolling it in between your finger and thumb, and to bring it up to the lips and just kind of bounce it off the lips with a thing. And so the fingertips and the lips, like there's a huge area of the brain that's processing just the sensations of those things, us of having tactile, subtle, kind of sensation ability as well. And so then asking the individuals in the group to get ready to put it into the mouth and like go ahead and pop it let it just sit there on the tongue. And then just notice, what did you do? Was it mostly finger? Was there a tongue assist? Like, how did you get it there? And I don't chew it. And you always got to, somebody normally starts before you stop them, but don't chew it. Just let it sit there. And does the body know that something's about to happen, that something's about to occur? Do you notice anything happening like saliva, anything along those lines? And so just noticing that the body may be in an expectation mode, and you may start getting other sensations or activity in the digestion system, something going on. And so get it ready to chew. Like go ahead and move it to where you're going to chew it, and just note, what did you do? What did you observe? Did you go to the left? Did you go to the right? Is it in the front? Like how are you getting ready to chew it? And now begin to start chewing it, and notice that mastication, that transference of chopping it up into little bitty bits, noticing that splash of flavor on the back of the tongue and how the saliva is coming in, and just continue masticating it until it goes down to just nothing. And then when and only when you're ready, go ahead and swallow it, and then see if you can watch it go all the way down to the stomach. And then sit with that for a moment, and then ask yourself the question, what does it feel like to be one raisin heavier? And generally we get a smile on that one as well. And so I ask you to probably try this, because when in the first week of homework, we ask people to have one meal like this. And there's an entire program that's called MB Eat that's good at treating binge eating, in a lot of different aspects of eating disorders. When you do this particular activity, mindful eat, there's normally an increase in our awareness of the pleasure of eating as well. So it can transform the eating experience, and we're taking in information. One of the things in the US that we have often is what's known as an obesity epidemic, where quite honestly, a lot of people are taking in the signal of I'm thirsty, they're chronically dehydrated, as I'm hungry, or they're not listening to their bodies, right? Because there's a very big difference between, you know what, I've just eaten and I have ingested all that I require for my nutrition. And it's not sexy, but like that's a thing. As opposed to, well, I've eaten and I've completely stuffed myself. I'm full and I probably need a couch and a fan because I'm miserable. I'm gonna need to process this for a while and don't touch me. You know, like, I mean, these are two different states of being, where if we're able to pay attention and truly communicate with what's going on, it has an effect on our health and the way that we move through life as well. So the purpose of doing the Raise in Meditation, one, is to begin the process of understanding that there is presence in pleasure. Two is that we begin demystifying mindfulness. And instead of it being some mystical Eastern philosophy, it becomes a practice of practicality, where we begin learning that we can control or take control of aspects of our life in how we are holding our reality, by developing a space that gives us room to hold more, so that we're not as squeezed and rushed and like, oh, I got to stand up and eat and get it through because I've already built 9 universes in my head before 9 a.m. in the morning, so I don't have time to stop and enjoy that breakfast. What we're saying is that there's a lot of things in our normal day that we're going to do pretty mindlessly. And the MBSR program is designed to, one, take people into a formal meditation, and two, take people into an informal meditation, and to begin conditioning the individual to where they take moments throughout their day that instead of being mindless, we start being mindful, where we're really truly paying attention, and we're practicing mindfulness with things that are, would normally be mundane. And so that there's a lot of variations of that, where we're practicing a body scan as one of the first major formal meditations, which is kind of like a date with yourself. And the science of the body scan, we've already talked about Vipassana in a previous. A mindfulness body scan is normally done a little bit slower than I've seen people do kind of Vipassana meditation. But it's a systematic exploration where we're paying attention to something with gratitude, with compassion. We're checking in, we're listening to it, and then we're moving on and then forgetting about that and just focusing on the next thing. And so a part of what's happening in the brain is that when we meditate, truly, you can only think about one thing at 1 second, one moment, right, in time. But we have the ability to switch very, very quickly between 8, 9, 10 things as well. So that's why it can seem like we're focusing on something in front, spatial awareness, but yet we've got this thing in the back of our mind also. What's really happening is we're focusing on this, and every time we switch, we're using energy, we're using a muscle, we're using a mechanism, we're activating a skill. And so a part of the science that they discovered on meditation is this ability to switch our thought from here to here, to focus on this, to focus on this, to focus on this, to focus on this. And the reason why that's such a great thing, that's such a great tool, is if you have intrusive thoughts that you can't control your thoughts, it becomes really, really helpful that you've developed this muscle to bring you out of the story of suffering you don't want to be in and over into the present moment, basically focusing on what it is that you actually do want to focus on. So if you want to be really good at something, and so we can use this, the example in a lot of different things. If you want to be really good at playing guitar, what do you do? And most people would answer honestly, well, you got to practice. Almost every musical instrument, except maybe the kazoo, you got to put in some time in order to get that muscle memory, that you have to practice. If you want to be really, really good at tennis, where you have that, that muscle memory, again, that amazing backhand, what do? Well, you get the machine with the balls, and you, same thing with batting, and you practice until you find that rhythm, you find that muscle, you create that muscle memory. So if you want to be really, truly present and not lost in a story of suffering that you have no control over, what do? You have to practice presence. And so that's a lot of what we're talking about in mindfulness, and the reason why there's different programs for that, MBSR being one of them, kind of a gold standard of it. And we say gold standard not because it's the only one that works. In fact, there's a lot of different ways to practice mindfulness. It's one of the ones that has the most data that's been kind of collected on it as well. So when they do that, it becomes kind of a norm, and we say, well, this will do this because we've been tracking it, and this is what is composed of it. In all honesty, mindfulness, there's a lot of ways to practice that I joke it's kind of like Taco Bell, like the 3 ingredients, like you can mix it up in a lot of different ways and probably create a lot of different products as well. We have really amazing neuroscientists that came together to put together mindfulness-based cognitive therapy that in the beginning, they wanted to show up for a weekend retreat on mindfulness, and then they could add that mindfulness component to their group cognitive therapy. And that's not really the way things work. They figured out very quickly that they had to have an 8-week program for mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, just like there's an 8-week program for mindfulness-based stress reduction, because you can't teach something that you don't practice. So just learning something in a weekend is not going to give you the depth and the conditioning where you're going to be able to hold space for people in order to teach them how to hold space. Because often the job of the facilitator is not necessarily to always be instructing in technique. Often it's to turn people back to inside themselves with the story that they're getting lost and show them how to become present. Right? And often the curriculum that shows up in a mindfulness course, all different types, is what shows up, what's present, like the issues that people bring, and showing people how to come out of the story, not focus on the story of what is, but begin to focus on what is. And the reason is because what is always neutral. And this is a fun exercise that you can do, no matter how horrible the story actually is. There's a story of what is, and then there's what is. Just in the way I said that, it told you, oh, but the story of that is horrible. Yeah, but what is normally, this is what happened, And what happened is normally neutral. The story of what is almost never neutral. And so a big part of our mindful inquiry and our conditioning and the 8-week MBSR program begins asking a lot of questions so that we can do root cognitive therapy on certain things. Like, is this true? We can sit with something until it kind of melts, and we can be with it in such a way that there is an organic process of adding energy unto what that is. And instead of having post-traumatic stress disorder, we can begin having post-traumatic stress growth because we've become so integrated with whatever it was that we were resisting that we're no longer resisting, but it doesn't mean that we're approving of it. We're learning how to grow with that. So in other words, learning how to be okay, even though ... fill in the blank. Because if we're not okay with whatever's happened to our life, then guess what? We're not okay. And that may sound simple and simpleton, but it's a very, very accurate, true statement that if we're truly going to move towards wellness, we have to figure out a way to change meaning in the way that we're holding things. And the first part of that often is to come out of the story. So what does that mean? Well, in the science, the neuroscience of mindfulness, what we've discovered is that when people are lost in the story of suffering, it means that there's a certain brain activity that they're engaging in that's normally known as the default mode network. Now, the default mode network is a great place of creativity and abstract thinking. And abstract thinking is what has made human beings, the masters of the planet Earth thus far. So, being able to ask questions like, is there a better way? And taking something and spinning it 360 degrees, and this is how you approach it, and this is how you go away, and is there a better way? But when we have the ability to be in an abstract version of the past, and the ability to be in an abstract version of the future, and even in an abstract version of now, where we're thinking about what everybody else is saying and doing, and none of it has to be true, we haven't even left the couch at home, right? And the body is keeping score of that. It's very easy for us to create a completely abstract illusionary reality and suffer from the consequences of that. And so our ability to train the mind to come out of the story so that we can reclaim the energy that's throwing us into stories of suffering becomes a very, very wholesome place for us to be. And it also, quite honestly, it can become a place of really amazing creation when you are able to move into a place of silence. Because when we're moving into silence, I mean, there's a lot of people that look at this a lot of different ways. Dr. Joe Dispenza, we begin moving into quantum reality. And a lot of mantra meditation, we're beginning to go into trance. We're going into a place where the infinite is possible as well, kind of scientifically. So mindfulness means, again, paying attention on purpose. On purpose. So if I'm going to start with the toe and then go to the next toe, forgetting about the first toe, and then move from the second toe to the third toe, forgetting about the second toe, I'm learning how to switch and let something go. And I'm training that particular mechanism as I'm moving through kind of a body scan. Now, a lot of people, when they do a body scan for the first time, they go to sleep. Why? Because often the first time that people are truly checking in with their body is when they're fluffing their pillow, getting ready to go to sleep. So there's some conditioning that's kind of there. So when we choose to do our meditations, can have an effect on our success as well. As people begin trying to be in the body or paying attention to the body, often a lot of people check out. They begin disassociating. So we know that disassociation can be a contraindication of mindfulness. And unfortunately, in MBSR, as one particular example, they don't address that a lot. As a trauma somatic processor, there are ways that we can process that. We can begin compartmentalizing in a way that actually helps integrate. And we'll go over that in one of the other sessions when we begin talking a little bit more about disassociation. But it's something to know that if you struggle with, say, a body, it's terrible, it's horrible, well, maybe there's a reason for that, and possibly there's a history of trauma where we disconnected from the body because that's where the pain was, right? And that's a coping mechanism. And we don't want to necessarily get rid of a coping mechanism, but we do want to learn how to add other ones, learn how to reconnect to our body, and be able to use the coping mechanism, but then use other coping mechanisms, and then use a coping mechanism. And so a part of us learning how to be with things that truly we might need to be with in order for us to grow from, we begin talking about oscillation. Oscillation is where in somatic and trauma processing, we're moving between something that's really, really hard, and we're learning how to move to something that's, maybe a lot easier. And so in Vipassana meditation, what are we doing? Well, we're scanning through the body, and it's like, oh yeah, but I'm holding that whatever in my upper back, and then we keep moving. And so we're moving away from the hard part, but then we're coming back to it. And then we're moving away from the hard part, and then we're coming back to it. And we're like an oscillating fan. We're moving into something that's difficult, and then we're moving away from it as well. And so mindfulness, a body scan, is kind of designed to do that, but sometimes it's not done or explained, the mechanism of it, in such a way that people will move back and forth as opposed to just begin resisting the hard parts. And that's where you see people struggling. We don't want people to, flail in their ability to go into the body. If they start struggling, we want to help them understand the why they're struggling as well. So hope that makes sense. So paying attention on purpose without judgment. What does without judgment mean? Well, without judgment generally means this. It means that we're not resisting something. It means that we're okay with being with something. It means that we're not pushing something away or grabbing something towards us, which is what ends up happening often when we come to our coping mechanisms, especially unhealthy, toxic coping mechanisms. Like I had a really, really bad day. I got to come home and I need all these carbohydrates and the sugar. That would be a part of me is like, is it so bad? Because eating that's been one of my coping mechanisms in life as well. But it's not necessarily being able to be with whatever it was that was hard about the day. The wonderful thing about mindful inquiry is there tends to only be so many of these patterns that we're reacting over and over and over again in the same way. And so with mindfulness, by being with things in a particular way and beginning to ask these questions of, when am I paying attention to something and it's really, really good? And when am I paying attention to something and it's really, really bad? And when am I moving away from something? When am I really moving towards something? These are really great questions to begin identifying what our patterns are, because we want to be able to move through these different stages of consciousness of awareness. I'm aware that maybe I've got a childhood issue, or I've got this daddy issue or mommy issue or past relationship issue, or oh my God, there's so many issues, right? But moving to a next stage of consciousness, which is acknowledgement, because awareness can sometimes be, yeah, I got this issue, but I'm going to go have this beer or this drink or this cake or whatever, or have this sex or whatever the coping mechanism may be that has ongoing relationship issues. I mean, you name it, as opposed to acknowledging it. And acknowledging means I'm going to look at it. I'm going to actually stop, be present, and I'm going to look at what the actual issue is. What mindfulness has the ability to do is it teaches you how to be present with something, to where we begin to learn how to be with it. We learn how to build space and in such a way that we can catch these things that are difficult for us. Because if we have no room, there's no space there. It's like in Man's Search for Meaning, Viktor Frankl said, and most of the therapists that are out there will join me, the space between the stimulus and the reaction is freedom. It's the freedom to choose the life you want instead of the one that's kind of dragging us, kicking and screaming most of the time. So having space, what does that mean? It means that we don't have a hair trigger, rubber band reaction to something. We're not triggering on something. We've got a little space so that if something comes at us, we're like, we can catch it, and we can, hold it with presence, and we can respond to it. Just because we have space doesn't mean that we're going to agree with everything and that everything's not going to be negative. It's just there's a really big difference between us reacting to something and us responding with wisdom to something as well. And so that's what we want to do. We want to have enough room in the way the body is holding our repetitive, ongoing stressors, and there's only so many of them, that once we have processed those in a certain way, that we will not be reacting the same way. So presence is a great fundamental primer for any type of trauma processing. And often, in order to be present, sometimes we have to do some trauma processing before we can even be in whatever that meditative state or that meditative practice is. And so if you've always wanted to learn meditation, you've heard so many great things about it, well, maybe don't go bite off an entire meditation process. Maybe go do, and there's another one of these sessions we're going to do that's going to go over the stages of silence, which is designed, it's actually a soul process, but metaphorically, but it's designed to show you a systematic way of beginning and entering into meditation and all of the blocks that are in the way of making that a successful practice. And sometimes we're trying to do this, but we haven't got these first kind of steps. It's kind of like, I'm going to go run the race, but did you put your tennis shoes on? Okay, did you tie them? Are they, are you hydrated? Like, there are some things sometimes that we need to prep, or we need to be able to handle before we jump off into some practices as well. So mindfulness is paying attention on purpose, with loving, without judgment. We're not pushing or pulling anything towards us, with loving kindness and compassion for ourselves. So loving kindness is one of the meditations. You heard me talk about metta in Vipassana, and that, introduction of Vipassana meditation. Loving kindness is metta. Metta is loving kindness. It's compassion for ourselves. And there's normally a way that we can process this, do a meditation to where we examine kind of the ridiculousness of what we do as individuals, where in one of the meditations we go through and we imagine sending love and energy to somebody that's easy to respect. And then we, have an exercise where we send love and energy to someone that's hard to respect, that we might even hate, right? Or we think that we do. And then we also end with sending love and energy to ourselves. And that sometimes is the hardest part, because we don't value ourselves, or maybe we don't value the person that we hate. But yet, if we're not okay with them, and if we're not okay with us, guess what? We're not okay. So this becomes a very fruitful area of mindful inquiry on shifting and changing the way that we're holding something and utilizing an exercise that is somatic in nature, imaginative in nature, to where we're engaging in an activity such as imagining sending energy and love to someone, which most people, are generally able to think of that process, loving someone, sending them love, sending them energy. So it becomes a very valuable aspect to where we're beginning to have compassion for ourselves. Why is that important? Because these are the two wings of mindfulness, being aware and having compassion, mostly for ourselves. Why is that so important? Well, because one of the biggest diseases of the U.S. population is unworthiness. That's why. And so being able to see ourselves as worthy, not from an egoic state, but just as a state of healthy wholeness, right, is something that a lot of people are not even familiar with. So we want to be able to approach this and ask these questions and be able to start doing mindful inquiry and identifying, well, it's normal and natural and healthy to feel whole by feeling worthy, right? And loved, secure attachment. So how do we begin doing that? What's in the way? What a great question. What's blocking us from feeling that way? And so this is where we get into, kind of side topics that help explain a lot of what we're doing in mindfulness. Attachment theory, secure attachment, insecure attachment, the variations of insecure attachment. And ironically, there is an overarching major cure for insecure attachment. It's secure attachment, right? It's love. So, a part of us going into different relationships and having the same type of relationship over and over and over again has to do with us fulfilling the lopsidedness of insecure attachment, because we're going to be drawn to what we know, what we've learned, what we've been conditioned with, where we need to flip that script on ourselves, begin examining why don't we feel worthy, and begin giving secure attachment to ourselves, not abandoning ourselves, being with ourselves. And a meditation where you have to stay and pay attention to something is a great way for you to say, I'm going to honor me. I'm not going away. I'm not going away from me. I'm going to honor me. I'm not going to abandon me. And when I learn how to not abandon me, guess what? I'm done with these complementary wound mirror relationships. I'm going to attract a different type of love, a different type of relationship, a different type of spouse, girlfriend, boyfriend. All of that can change or shift, or it can change within the relationship that I'm in now as well. So we don't see the world the way it is. We see the world the way we are. So again, loving kindness and compassion is a root foundational place to begin inquiry, going, what's between me and loving myself? So mindfulness, paying attention on purpose, without judgment, not pushing anything away, not grabbing anything towards us, because a rule in trauma processing is you can't leave a place that you don't admit doesn't exist. And what you resist persists. And so often we have to be with the felt sense to identify the way the body is holding whatever that story is. And sometimes that's layers down. Remember we were talking about one of the first things that we do in MBSR and in stress reduction with most of my clientele is we ask the question, why are you here? How are you struggling? How are you suffering? Why are you here? And then the second question we ask is, why are you really here? And then the third question is, why are you really, really here? And in an 8-week MBSR or in this process, no matter how you come at it, that may not even be a question that you can answer with the first question. That may be something that it takes you, some time to be with, like ice melting, to get at the heart of it in such a way that 2 or 3 weeks down the line, you're like, oh my God, this is why I'm really here. And I didn't even know, So mindfulness it's a corporate buzzword. It's a state of being that is the practice of presence, whether we do it with MBSR, whether we do it with the mantra meditation, whether we do it with, all the apps that are available that are out there as well. It is a primer for doing more serious work. And it is a great way to assess where you are, because if you struggle with that, it's going to point to what it is that you struggle with, which will help identify something that needs to be processed. So I hope that this was helpful in understanding the concept and the practice and the need for mindfulness. And with this practice and with whatever you decide to do with it, may I say, may all beings have peace, and may all beings be free from suffering. If you'd like more information about mindfulness, obviously reach out with the different programs that we do. You can Google and find just an enormous amount of data on things now. Exponentially, it's grown hugely in the last 2 decades. And if we can answer some questions for you, reach out and we'll try to do what we can. All right, guys, namaste. We'll see you in the next section.